Good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of Between the Pillars. My name is John Schussman. I am the outreach librarian at Fisher. Introduce my colleague in a minute. Just wanted to say that this is our final episode of Between the Pillars for the 2020-21 academic year. We're going to take a little bit of a break over the summer and return to you in the fall. Hopefully when we're all back at the library. As you can see, I'm still doing this remotely. I was at the library this week, which was kind of nice. But as you can see, my colleague David Fernandez is at the library this morning, and wanted to introduce him. And we're going to introduce the topic. We're going to do a special sort of gay pride theme topic this week. We've been trying to celebrate Pride throughout the month, but we really want to celebrate Pride this week, and particularly coming up this weekend, which is traditionally the weekend that Toronto has its wonderful Gay Pride Parade, which unfortunately, due to the pandemic, has been canceled again, but postponed. Why don't we call it that, since I'm sure it'll be back next year. But wanted to have David on because we wanted to focus in specifically on something within our collections that one of the favorite things I like to show to classes is, when we have classes coming through is our gay pulp fiction collection. So welcome, David. Another reason why I want to have David on is actually he's going on leave in a couple of weeks. He's going to be on leave for 6 months, so we wanted to have him one last time before he takes his sabbatical. So welcome, David. Thank you for being on the podcast. This is your second appearance, actually. Now that I think about it.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about our gay pulp fiction collection. Maybe you could talk about sort of how it came to the library, when it came, and its size as well.
Sure. Again, thank you for having me. It's always great to talk about collections, and today it's nice to talk about Pride. This is probably the only Pride event I'll be doing this year, so I'm happy to show these items that I think are so important. And the collection that we have is quite substantial. We have over 1,100 items in the holdings, and they were acquired in 2004 by the library from a local collector, Ian Young, who was also one of the founding members of the University of Toronto Homophile Association. And of course, a collector of pulps. So many of the books that we have, we've added material to the collection since 2004. But many of the books that we have were not only collected, at the time where they were being published, but he kept, adding to the collection all the way to the 1990s when pulps were no longer published in the same way.
For those that don't know what pulp fiction is, and specifically what gay pulp fiction is, maybe we could talk a little bit about what exactly is that genre? What are those books?
In terms of defining them as rare books, or in the context of the collections, these are part of popular literature. Of course, they're paperbacks, but what makes them different from other paperbacks, especially the dime novels or the earlier pulps that would have been published from the end of the 19th century until the 1940s, when we begin to see the new paperback appear in the market. And these are described as mass paperback, mass printed or mass published paperbacks. So like I said, like Pocket Books, for example, in 1939 started to publish what we know today as the modern pulps. And then they took off in the 1950s. And what makes them, some of the qualities that make them, pulps, deal with, like, for example, the covers, lurid, vivid covers that in many ways created a new visual language to describe the contents that were equally sensational. So in ranging from like different topics. So not only about sexuality and gender, but also race, class, and some other interesting topics. And also the way they were presented to readers with, blurbs in paratext that were doing this. It was, that were doing the same as the visual narratives that you had in the cover, trying to attract the readers' attention to the covers.
But
They were
but
found all over the place. Sorry for
I was just
interrupting.
going to say, I mean, maybe you mean you use the word lurid, but on many ways, these are not. There's some very important writers in some of these, in some they're represented in some of these books as well.
For sure, and that's one of the reasons that they are so important, because queer creators or gay and lesbian creators, after the 1950s, sometimes these were the only spaces where they could share their work or publish their work, either using their real names or under pseudonyms of pen names. So we can see quite a few examples in a bit of works that are now considered part of the queer literary canon.
One more question before we go to the sort of the show and tell portion is, where would a lot of these books have been sold?
All over the place. So in chain stores, pharmacies, train stations. And that's one of the reasons they were so successful, right? Because readers could have access to them all over North America and also in Britain.
Right.
And so in magazine racks. So the mass paperback publishers at the time took advantage of networks that were already in existence. So networks for distributing, for example, magazines and newspapers.
Right.
So like I said, you would find them everywhere. And there's so many stories of gay and lesbian readers who were acquiring these books in the 1950s and 60s that tell us, that give us an idea of how they were acquired, right? In magazine racks or
Right.
in, tall rotating paperback racks that we still see in many stores today. Just being attracted by the cover,
Yeah.
picking it up and taking it home to realize or confirm what they thought. This is a gay novel or this is a lesbian story.
So why don't we go to, you got some things to show us under the document camera, first of all.
Yes, and so let's start with these three examples of lesbian fiction or lesbian pulp fiction. And Women Barracks is an extremely important example. And many scholars have argued that this is the book that really starts the um, revolution, or like the golden age of lesbian pulps. It was first published in 1950, and within a year, the book sold over 1 million copies.
Wow.
So imagine how popular it was at the time.
Right.
And the cover of this book inspired many other covers that reproduce this idea of, three women on the cover in various stages of undress. So, for example, you have here this nice example, The Lovin' and the Daring, and this was published in 1952.
Right.
By the Popular Library, a very important publisher. Here we have 69 Barrow Street, and this one was published in 19. Again, some of the qualities that we see in this book, like the illustrations and the blurbs. Here's another lovely example. And this was published, I think, in 1960s.
Wow. Do you know what kind of print runs would some of these have?
Millions in some cases, in reprints.
Right.
So and they were publishing not only original works like Women Barracks, but also reprints of earlier titles.
Right.
Like The Well of Loneliness was originally published in 1928 as a hardback.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is the first paperback edition that happens also to be a pulp in 1951. A book that had been, as we read here, denounced, banned, and applauded in Britain, but then, of course, that made it hugely popular among North American readers.
Right.
And another example that I love, this is one of my favorite books in the collection, is The Story of a Strange Love, Diana.
Mm-hmm.
And this is also a reprint of an earlier work. The first edition, this is the first paperback edition of 1955, but the original appeared much earlier, I believe in 1918, 1919, I forget the actual date.
It's amazing actually that they're in such good shape. Obviously, Ian Young was looking for pristine copies of some of these materials, I'm guessing.
Yes, many of the books that he collected are in perfect shape, which is, not common among a lot of these books. Very much like the yellowbacks of the 19th century, right?
Hmm.
People used them, read them, and discarded them in many cases. But also for books on some of these topics, I assume a lot of readers didn't want to keep them around,
Right,
uh, fear of you know retaliation or being outed for having this kind of books in their shelves.
right. Let's go to one of your favorite writers, James Baldwin, because I
Yeah.
know that, in fact, this is a book that you lent me one of your copies of the book as well.
So the first edition appeared in 1956,
Yeah,
and James Baldwin's actually his agent discouraged him from publishing what the agent described as an overtly gay novel.
right,
In fear that the career of the young writer at the time would be affected. This is what we are looking at here. This is actually the first paperback edition of the novel. It also published in 1956, and it
how old
has.
was James Baldwin at the time when he published Giovanni's Room?
I think he was born in
Okay,
1924.
early 30s, I'm guessing.
Yeah, yeah, 1924, and the novel appeared in 1956.
Okay,
And so this is the cover of the same illustration that appears in the first edition as part of the dust jacket.
right,
And quickly, so many different mass paperback publishers started to reproduce different covers,
right,
capturing the different themes of the novel. So here we have the love affair between David, an American living in Paris, and Giovanni, an Italian living in Paris and working at a bar where they met. Here we have another showing the space, Giovanni's room, and then Giovanni or David, main character, standing alone. Here's one of my favorite covers. This is by Corgi, publishers of Britain. And here we have again the love affair or the two men together. Some other covers also, the daring kind of figure of the character again standing in the room. And many covers also cover the love triangle
right.
between David, Giovanni, and Ella, his girlfriend.
Out of curiosity, how did the rights for the actual text of the material? I mean, obviously, there's a number of different publishers involved here. Unless they're under all the under the umbrella of a one main publisher, do you know?
No, they're all different publishers. So,
Okay,
like Corgi, in the case of James Baldwin, Corgi published quite a few pulp editions of the book,
okay,
and not only of Giovanni's Room, but Another Country and other of his works.
right.
In this, mhm.
What do we know about the artists that worked on some of the covers of some of the Pulp Fiction works?
In some cases, we know quite a bit, and we know who they were and who they worked for, and the kind of commissions that they did. But in most cases, they're not listed, or they're like nearly impossible to track
Hmm.
down. And that's one important area of research that not only librarians but academics in general need to look into, because pulps, one of the features that make them so important is the visual language that they created, a
Right.
visual language that was understood and decoded in some ways by gay, lesbian, and queer readers at the time.
Hmm.
And that's why it's important to pay attention to um, the legacy of those creators and try to uncover those stories that we still don't know.
Right. Do we have anything else you want to show us?
I have, yes, another example here. So pulps not only dealt with issues around sexuality, but also gender.
Right.
Uh, and it started in the 1950s when the first sort of announcements of the so-called sex change,
Right.
or sex affirmation or gender affirmation surgery, um, were taking so much space or attention in the media at the time, and of course that translated into the pulp publishing industry. The treatment of the topic is sensational at best. And
Hmm.
as you can see, and as you study the books, you realize that the pulp publishers were just cashing in kind of the sensational stories at the time.
Right.
But they did publish some important works, including this one by John Morris, who passed away last year after having a long and prolific career as a journalist and writer.
Right.
These are really interesting because, when I use these books for teaching, you can see how students can make connections between, current issues dealing with gender identity and transgender rights. Um, they can still see how even at this time, for example, the medical language or describing transgender individuals using the language of pathology,
Hmm.
it's present in many of these books. So these are important primary sources for understanding the evolution, or in some cases, the lack of change in the way that media or popular culture deals with transsexuality in general.
It's interesting too. I mean, what are some of the other ways that you use these books in either in classes?
Um, I bring them out every opportunity I have. The students from a university college course called Sex in the City, they've been coming to the Fisher for the last 6 years. And I have very fond memories of having these books out. There was a moment, I would say like 3 4 years ago, that I did a presentation using the books, and then I told students just sit around the tables, pick up a book, and start looking at them. And when I looked, I had like 7 or 8 undergrads just actually reading, and some of them stayed longer after the class was done because they were so they connected with
Right.
the books in a very personal way. And that's another reason these books are so important, and perhaps the most important one, that they not only represent queer history in many ways, uh, but they have that ability to connect to readers at a very personal level. So that's one way I always bring them to class, to try to talk about that these books, spoke to individuals, or continue to speak to individuals, and generation after generation. Um,
How would people find these books then in the catalog? Are they cataloged individually?
yes, they are cataloged individually, and so we've cataloged all the portion of the collection that was used for a publication that the collector Ian Young put
Mhm.
together in the early 2000s. So that's about over 700 titles. And then we're making our way through the backlog.
Okay.
But we continue to add new titles. Recently, we acquired a large collection of lesbian pulps,
Right.
or not a large, but a good selection of lesbian pulps, because it's one area that is a bit difficult to collect. There are
Mm.
not that many copies that are easily found, but I'm trying to, improve the representation in that area, and also pulps dealing with transgender issues.
Are they tough to find?
No, they're not. It's just sometimes it's better to buy them as collections, or buy
Right.
them,
Individually.
exactly.
Yeah. So perfect. Anything else you want to add on this amazing topic? As I said, I've used these books a lot, and I know this collection fairly well because actually I was doing my practicum at the Fisher when this collection first came in. So it's a collection I know fairly well as well. But anything else you want to add about this wonderful collection of material?
But I hope people, understand why they're important, and why they have They play an important role, when we're talking about the history of like queer history in the 20th century, and they have a rightful place in special collections.
Right.
And they're found not only here at the Fisher, but across the city. The archives have fantastic collections. Also, York University,
York's got a
another.
great collection of the lesbian material.
Exactly. And so, anyone that's interested in this topic, we are very privileged in the city to have access to numerous collections to continue to explore such an important print culture and part of queer history of the 20th century.
That's great. I love your passion for this topic as well.
Thank you, John.
So thank you, David. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for this entire season of Between the Pillars. They're all up on YouTube, 14 or 15 episodes now that cover a wide range of materials. I would encourage anyone to check any of our past episodes as well. So for that, enjoy your summer. We will be back in hopefully September, October. Hopefully we'll be doing these live again back in the library. So until then, enjoy this coming weekend. Enjoy Gay Pride weekend. And enjoy the summer, and we'll see you in the fall.
Thank you, John. Take care.